As a home coffee roaster, one of the most important concepts I learned about was the coffee roasting profile. So what is a coffee roasting profile? In its simplest terms, it's applying heat to our coffee beans over a period of time. That's the profile. We may have logging software that shows us what that looks like. Some of us may be writing our temperatures down and logging all of that and then putting it out on a graph or just logging their temperatures. And then others may just be watching with their eyes, watching the color and smelling. That's total manual roasting. There is a profile for that coffee, and you may even be watching. You want to be at a certain period of time at first crack. You want to have a total roast time that lasts 10 minutes or 15 minutes. That's a coffee roasting profile. The big question is, how do we know what profile to use in order to roast great coffee? Every one of us is going to have a profile that looks a little different. And the reason why it looks different is because there are a ton of variables. The roasting environment, the temperature of the roasting environment we're in, the equipment we're using, the type of bean we're using. It just goes on, and there's all these variables. All right, so the biggest variable that we need to talk about is the roaster itself. The type of roasting equipment we have is going to make a huge impact on what our profile is going to look like. An air roasting profile is going to look different, a lot different than a drum roasting profile. Yes, it's temperature over time. It's the same basic concepts, but an air roaster is going to be able to roast coffee a lot quicker. So that timeline is going to be shorter. The profile is going to look different. This machine here is going to have a longer roasting time than my air roaster might have, my fresh roast. And if I decide I want to roast coffee in a frying pan or using one of those electric frying pans with the wand that spins around, that profile is going to look a lot different because it's going to take longer to roast the coffee. So our total roast time is going to influence our profile, and each of these coffee roasters take longer or shorter to roast. The Beanmore is not going to roast coffee in 6 minutes unless we use a super small batch size in order to do that. And we'll talk about batch size in just a second. If you're thinking of buying a coffee roasting machine or some equipment to roast coffee, you should think about how these roasting machines roast differently and how the profiles are going to be different. And I hope that some of this comes out in the video series that I'm doing here, so that as you decide what roaster is best for you, one of the important deciding factors is going to be your profile. What are your goals? What type of coffee do you like to drink? Maybe there's a specific roaster that's best for me based on the type of roasts that I'm looking for. So we're going to try to answer that. So the roasting equipment is one factor. The next is the type of bean that we decide to buy. You go to your favorite place online to buy your beans, and you have them now at home and you want to roast them. There are tasting notes on that bag. There's farm information that website offered to let you know how high those beans were grown at, what altitude. And you can measure that coffee and you can measure the density of that coffee, because that is a huge factor in really how this coffee is going to roast, how heat is going to be applied to those beans over time. Density is a huge topic. I did a video on density. Check that out, because that is going to give you an idea of some of what I'm talking about. But a high density coffee can handle heat up front, higher temperatures, a lot better than a lower density coffee. A Brazilian coffee is going to take a little longer to roast. We have to be a little more gentle with it than an Ethiopian coffee. You know, there are some exceptions to what I just shared, but generally speaking, density is going to make a huge difference, and it's going to determine what your profile looks like. Your roasting range for an air roaster could be anywhere from 6 minutes to 9 minutes. In that space of time, you may use all 9 minutes for a Brazilian coffee, but an Ethiopian coffee, you could roast that coffee at 6 minutes. On the drum roaster here, I could roast an Ethiopian coffee maybe 7.5 minutes might be a great starting point for a high density coffee if I really want to do something that's light and fruity. Or I may go 10 or 12 minutes if I'm doing that Brazilian coffee where I need to be more careful with my charge temperatures up front and I don't want roasting defects and such. So the type of coffee that you buy is going to play a role in the profile that you use. We talked about the density of the beans, but we didn't talk about the process. A dry processed coffee is going to roast differently than a washed coffee. The size of the beans is going to have an influence. The batch size is going to have an influence. I did a video on batch size. You can check that out. Batch size influences your coffee roasting profile. How much coffee you put in at a time to roast. So if your roaster holds 400 grams and you're roasting 400 grams of coffee, that profile is going to look different than if I roast 200 grams in that 400 gram roaster. In the fresh roast, if you're roasting 140 grams, if you put 180 grams of coffee in, that profile is going to look differently. So our batch size makes a difference. I'm sharing all these variables with you because these are things that we need to be thinking about as we go through what we want our profile to look like. So what else is going to affect the profile? The environment is another factor. So if you're roasting outside and it's cold out, it's going to take longer for you to roast that coffee in the winter than it would in the summer. And so that's going to affect your profile. That's going to affect the temperatures that you use to roast that coffee, and that's going to be a different profile. The roast level, how dark we want our coffee, that's going to influence the roast profile. Temperatures over time, it's going to look differently than if we're doing a light roast. So it's not just time, but it's temperatures themselves. And so how we apply those temperatures in each of the coffee roasting phases is going to influence how that coffee tastes. Not as much with the dry phase. The dry phase, I've got a video on that. Why is the dry phase important? Is designed to help us stay in control of our roast. So if you're roasting on a hive, if you're roasting on a drum roaster, especially, those roasters tend to be a little easier to have coffee take off on them, but you can do the same damage with an air roaster. You can apply too much heat up front, and that's why it's important for us to stay in control of our roast, and that is why the dry phase is important. But the flavor development, the crafting of the coffee itself is going to be taking place from the end of dry until we drop the coffee. That's going to have an influence on our flavors, and the temperatures that we use to start and finish that roast are going to play a huge role in what our coffee tastes like within that coffee roasting profile. All right, I hope that makes sense. Now we're going to give ourselves some homework to do, and then we'll pick that up in the next video. I've got a coffee roasting worksheet that I've shown in several of my videos. It looks something like this. I'll put it up on the screen. And the information that's on here is really important. This is going to help us start to think about all the things that I just said. All of the things that we talked about related to the bean, temperatures, time. Those three factors are huge, and this worksheet is going to help us work through that together. So download a worksheet. They're free. Tim H., one of my viewers, put this together, and I've always offered it free on my site. So I'll have a link. It takes you to, and I'm moving some of my resources all in the same place. I've got free resources I'm starting to put up on my Buy Me a Coffee page. So it's under extras, and you'll see that I've got this for free, as well as I think there's one coffee roasting profile that's out there right now, but I'm going to be putting more content out on the extras that's free for people, so you should check that out. So one of the things that we need to answer based on our experience, how quick can we roast coffee without causing roasting defects? Think about your experiences and then make a note of that under roasting notes. And if you don't know what roasting defects are, I've got a video on roasting defects. You can check that out. Write that down. Write down how long your normal total roast time is, too. Make that as a note. And now the dry time, that's the time the coffee starts its roasting process through to when the beans turn yellow. That dry time, write down your typical time that you spend getting your coffee to turn yellow. From dry end to first crack, write that time down. And then from first crack until development, write that time. How much time do you spend in that phase? Write that down. Also, under the major events, if you want, it's kind of similar, but yet it's different. Write down or what time you get to yellow, what time you get to first crack, what time you get to second crack, and what time you end the roast. It's kind of the same, but it's a little different. We're breaking it out in phases over on the right, and we're just marking these events at here on this major events section. And make a note of that. If you have never measured density before, check out my density video and measure the density of your coffee and kind of put that into a class. Is it a high density coffee? Is it a medium density or a medium high density? Or is it a lower density coffee? The video will talk about the number range and show you how to calculate all that out. Go ahead and do that. Also make a note of the process type of the coffee that you have. And then in our next video, we're going to reference our worksheets together. I'm going to put together a worksheet as well. And then we're going to talk about a profile, and we're going to do a profile together. All right. Well, thanks for joining me today. If this video was helpful for you, please let me know that in the comments. If this is a topic that is new to you and you have questions about it, ask those in the comments so that we can answer those questions. So as we move along in this video series, you'll be along with us. You won't be left behind. And share your thoughts on how this has been presented. If you have suggestions, I'm always interested to hear what you have to say about my videos. So thanks again for watching. Also, if you guys are interested in diving deep or have specific questions of things that I don't talk about and you want to spend time with me one-on-one, I've had people already take advantage of that. I have made a way for you to connect with me, and we can do a one-on-one Zoom call together if you're interested, and I'll have a link in the description and you can check that out. So thanks so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to doing this together with you, and I hope you guys have a great week roasting. We'll see you next time.